She was a bargaining chip, a pretty jewel sold to settle a father's gambling debt. In the spring of 1819, Lady Anna Vance, known for her gentle heart and artistic soul, was condemned to a life-sentence marriage to a man she had never met. Her new husband was a ghost, a phantom of the aristocracy whispered about, in hushed tones, Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood. They called him the Iron Duke, a man scarred in body and soul, who ruled his northern domain with a cold, ruthless efficiency. This was not a union of hearts, but a contract signed in desperation. But what happens when a forced alliance, born from ruin and shadow, sparks a fire that could either forge an empire or burn them both to ashes? The scent of rain-soaked earth and fading roses clung to the air in the gardens of Vance Manor, a fragrance that had always meant home to Anna Vance. Today it smelled of decay. At 20, Anna possessed a quiet beauty, with hair the colour of spun gold and eyes the grey of a coming storm. Her true passion, however, lay not in her reflection, but in the charcoals and canvases stacked in her modest studio. She captured light and shadow, finding the soul of a landscape or the hidden sorrow in a wilting flower. Now the only emotion she could find to paint was a suffocating dread. Her world had shattered 2 nights ago in her father's study. Sir Reginald Vance, a baronet with a lineage far grander than his finances, had finally confessed the full extent of his ruin. The London card tables, the failed investments, the mounting debts they had formed a tidal wave of ink and obligation that was about to pull their family under. Vance Manor was mortgaged to its last stone, the servants' wages were months in arrears, and the creditors were no longer accepting polite deferrals. "There is a solution," Sir Reginald had said, his face ashen, avoiding her gaze. "An offer of marriage, Anna." Anna's heart had plummeted. She had always assumed she would marry, of course, but for love, or at least for a respectable and kind match within their social circle. She had even held a secret youthful affection for Lord Percival Croft, a handsome and seemingly charming neighbour. "Who is it?" she had asked, her voice barely a whisper. "The Duke of Blackwood." The name fell into the silence of the room like a coffin lid closing. Alistair Beaumont, the Duke of Blackwood. Even in their provincial corner of Hertfordshire, the whispers of his name were legendary and terrifying. He was fabulously wealthy, having built a commercial empire of mines and mills in the unforgiving north of England. But he was also a recluse. He never attended the London season, never appeared at court. Rumours painted him as a disfigured tyrant, a cold, cruel man who hadn't been seen in society for over a decade, not since the fire that had claimed his entire family and left him scarred. They said he was more beast than man. No Anna had breathed the word catching in her throat. "Father, you cannot." "He will settle all my debts," Sir Reginald pressed on his voice, gaining a desperate strength. "He will provide a generous dowry for your sister Clara, ensuring her future. He will restore this house. He asks for only one thing in return: your hand in marriage." The cold transactional nature of it made her feel sick. Why me? A duke of his standing could have anyone. His solicitors were specific, her father mumbled, finally looking at her with shame-filled eyes. "The Vance name is old and respected, if not wealthy. And our lands. Our eastern pasture borders the River Len. He requires the water rights for a new mill he intends to build. Marrying you is the quickest way to secure them permanently." So that was it. She wasn't a bride, she was a deed, a parcel of land with a title attached. The betrayal was a physical ache in her chest. Her art, her dreams, her very future, all sold for water rights, and to pay for the sins of her father. She looked at her frail mother, who sat weeping silently in a wing-back chair, and thought of her bright, bubbly younger sister Clara, whose future would be extinguished by their family's disgrace. The gilded cage was closing in. 2 days later, the Duke's solicitor, a severe man named Mr. Thompson, arrived with the contracts. There was no courtship, no exchange of letters, not even a portrait. She was to be married by proxy in their local church in 1 week and then travel north to Blackwood Manor. Her husband would not be in attendance at the ceremony. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of numb obedience. Her mother and Clara wept as they packed her trunks, their tears feeling like acid on Anna's skin. Lord Percival Croft paid a visit, his handsome face a mask of concern. "Anna, this is an outrage," he'd declared, taking her hand in the garden. "To be sold to that northern monster. Everyone knows the stories. They say the fire drove him mad. You can refuse. Run away with me. I may not have a duke's fortune, but I would cherish you." For a fleeting moment, she was tempted. But where would they go? How would they live? And what of her family? Percival's offer was a romantic fantasy. The Duke of Blackwood's was a cold, hard reality that would save her mother and sister. "I cannot, Percival," she said, pulling her hand away. "My decision is made." The look of disappointment on his face was quickly replaced by something else, a flicker of calculation she'd never noticed before. The day of the proxy wedding was grey and damp. Anna wore a simple cream travelling dress, not a wedding gown. The church was empty, save for her family and the vicar. Mr. Thompson stood in for the Duke, his dry voice echoing in the hollow space as he spoke the vows on behalf of Alistair Beaumont. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Duchess of Blackwood, Anna felt nothing but an icy emptiness. She was shackled to a ghost. The journey north was long and arduous. The lush green hills of Hertfordshire gave way to the stark, windswept moors of the north. The carriage climbed higher, the air growing colder. Finally, as twilight bled across the sky, they passed through a set of imposing iron gates. A long, winding drive through a dark forest of ancient oaks led to a clearing. And there it was. Blackwood Manor. It was no manor, it was a fortress, a sprawling Gothic masterpiece of grey stone turrets and gargoyles that clawed at the purple sky. It was magnificent and terrifying, a palace built of shadows. It looked as though it had been carved from the very rock of the moor itself, and it was as welcoming as a tomb. The heavy oak door swung open as the carriage stopped. A line of servants stood rigidly in the grand entrance hall, their faces pale and unsmiling in the flickering candlelight. At their head was a stern, rail-thin woman in a black dress, her grey hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her skin taut. "Your Grace," the woman said, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. She curtsied stiffly. "I am Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. Welcome to Blackwood Manor." Anna stepped out of the carriage, her legs unsteady. The air was cold-smelling of stone and beeswax. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked past the housekeeper down the cavernous flagstone hall, half expecting her monstrous husband to emerge from the shadows. But the hall remained empty. "His Grace." Anna began, her voice a fragile whisper. "The Duke is in his study," Mrs. Gable stated flatly. "He does not wish to be disturbed. I am to show you to your chambers. Your luggage will follow. Not even a greeting." She was a delivery, a piece of cargo to be stored away. As Mrs. Gable led her up the sweeping, uncarpeted stone staircase, Anna felt the full weight of her new reality. She was a prisoner in a fortress, married to a phantom, and utterly terrifyingly alone. The Duchess's chambers were a world away from the cold, austere stone of the rest of the manor. They were a suite of rooms, a sitting room, a bedroom, and a dressing area, lavishly appointed with furniture upholstered in deep sapphire velvet, thick Persian rugs, and dark, polished mahogany. A fire roared in the marble fireplace, casting a warm, dancing glow that fought back against the encroaching night. On a small table sat a tray with tea and sandwiches. It was a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. Anna ate little her stomach, a tight knot of anxiety. She explored the rooms, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the bedposts and the delicate patterns on the wallpaper. Everything was clearly expensive, chosen with taste, yet it felt impersonal, like a room in a high-class inn. There was nothing of her husband in it. There was also, she noted with a complex mix of relief and insult, no connecting door to any other bedchamber. She spent the first 3 days in a state of suspended animation. She saw no one but a young, timid maid named Sarah who brought her meals, and the ever-present, ever-silent Mrs. Gable. She asked Sarah about the Duke. "We don't see him much, Your Grace." The girl whispered, her eyes wide, with something between fear and awe. "He stays in the West Wing mostly, in his study or his workshops. We just hear him sometimes, pacing at night." The West Wing. It was a place the staff clearly avoided. On the 4th day, Anna decided she could not be a prisoner in her own home. If her husband would not come to her, she would go to him. She had to see the man, the monster she was tied to. Dressed in a simple grey day dress, she left her rooms and made her way towards the West Wing. The air grew colder here. The portraits on the walls were of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow her with disapproval. She reached a large, imposing set of double doors. Taking a shaky breath, she raised her hand and knocked. Silence. She knocked again, louder this time. After a long moment, a low voice rumbled from within. "Enter." Her hand trembled as she turned the heavy brass handle and pushed the door open. The room was a library, but unlike any she had ever seen. Yes, books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, but the vast central table was not for reading. It was covered in blueprints, schematics, and strange, intricate brass models of gears and engines. The air smelled of ink, old paper, and machine oil. And there, standing by the far window with his back to her, was him, the Duke of Blackwood. He was taller than she had imagined, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his dark tailcoat. He did not turn. "You are the Duchess, I presume," he said, his voice a deep baritone that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. It was not cruel, merely devoid of emotion. "I am Anna," replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "And you are my husband. I thought it appropriate we should meet." He turned slowly, and for the first time, Anna Vance looked upon the face of Alistair Beaumont. The rumors, she realized, were both true and entirely inadequate. He was not a monster. He was formidable. He had a strong jaw, a straight nose, and intelligent, piercingly blue eyes, but the left side of his face was marred by a vicious scar. It was a puckered, silvery trail that ran from his temple down his cheek, narrowly missing his eye and pulling the corner of his mouth into a permanent faint sneer. It was a fearsome mark, a testament to some past horror. He watched her, his expression unreadable, waiting for her to flinch, to recoil in disgust as so many others must have. Anna met his gaze directly, holding it. She was an artist. She had studied anatomy, the play of muscle and bone. She saw the pain in the scar, not the ugliness. "Your Grace," she said, dipping into a small curtsy. A flicker of something surprise crossed his features before being extinguished. He gestured to a chair opposite the great desk. "Please, sit." She did her back straight, her hands clasped in her lap. He remained standing, a towering, shadowed figure against the light of the window. "I trust your journey was acceptable, and the rooms are to your satisfaction." He stated the words, clipped and formal. It was not a question so much as a confirmation. "They are, thank you." "Good." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her. "Let us be clear, madam, about the nature of our arrangement. This is a marriage of convenience, a contract. You have brought me a respectable name and access to the River Lena. In return, I have secured your family's future and provided you with a home and a title. I expect you to perform the duties of a duchess, manage the household host when necessary, and remain discreet. I will not be a husband to you in the conventional sense. I have my work. I require solitude. You will have your wing of the house, and I will have mine. We need not interfere with one another." The cold finality of his words was like a slap. This was her life sentence, laid bare. To be a decorative fixture in a cold, empty house, married to a man who wanted nothing from her but her name and her land. A spark of defiance ignited within her. She was more than a contract. "I see," she said, her voice cooler than she intended. "And what if those terms are not to my satisfaction, Your Grace?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "The contracts are signed. Your father's debts are paid. There is nothing left to negotiate. I am not negotiating my father's debts. I am speaking of my life," she shot back, rising from her chair to face him. "You may have purchased my hand, but you have not purchased my silence or my spirit. I will be your duchess as you require, but I will not be a ghost in your house, confined to my rooms. This is my home now, as well as yours." For the first time, a genuine emotion broke through his icy composure, a look of grudging respect. He studied her for a long moment, the scar on his face seeming to deepen in the dim light. "As you wish," he said finally. "The house and its grounds are at your disposal, all except for this study and my workshops. Those are mine alone. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to attend to." He turned back to the window, a clear dismissal. The audience was over. Anna walked out of the study, her head held high, though her heart was pounding. She had met the beast and she had not backed down. The encounter had not been warm or kind, but it had been something. She had seen the man, not just the myth, a man of intellect, of purpose, and of deep, carefully guarded wounds. The rules of their strange marriage had been set. He in his world of shadow and steel, she in her world of gilded solitude. But Anna Vance was not one to accept the confines of any cage, no matter how beautiful. She would explore every corner of her new home, and she would find out everything there was to know about the enigmatic, scarred duke she now called husband. In the weeks that followed, Anna and Alistair lived as two ships passing in the night, inhabitants of the same vast ocean, but on entirely different courses. They would occasionally take supper together in the cavernous dining hall, a long expanse of polished mahogany separating them. The meals were silent, formal affairs, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware. He would eat quickly, his focus distant, and then retreat back to the sanctuary of the West Wing, leaving her alone with the flickering candelabras and the stern portraits of his ancestors. Anna, true to her word, refused to be a recluse. She began by taking over the household accounts from a relieved Mrs. Gable. She discovered the Duke, while meticulous in his business affairs, was neglectful of the domestic. The estate was profitable, yet the staff were underpaid, and the manor itself was falling into a state of genteel disrepair in the unused wings. Anna, using the generous allowance Alistair had provided, gave the staff a raise, ordered necessary repairs, and began the process of breathing life back into the dormant corners of the house. Her actions did not go unnoticed. Mrs. Gable, who had initially viewed Anna with suspicion, began to thaw. Her crisp pronouncements softened, and she started offering snippets of information, like a gardener tending a slow-growing plant. The late Duchess, his mother, loved these gardens, she commented one afternoon, finding Anna sketching the overgrown rose bushes in a forgotten walled garden. She would spend hours here. After the fire, he couldn't bear it. He ordered the gates locked. The fire, Anna said gently. It happened here at the manor. Mrs. Gable's face tightened. No, Your Grace, at their London residence, 10 years ago. His Grace was only 21. He was there, tried to save them. She looked away, her gaze distant and pained. He pulled his little sister, Lady Eleanor, from the flames himself, but it was too late. He was the only survivor. The housekeeper's words painted a devastating picture. A young man barely older than Anna was now losing his entire family in one horrific night, bearing the physical and emotional scars for the rest of his life. His coldness, his reclusiveness, it was not malice, but a fortress built around unimaginable grief. Anna's explorations of the manor yielded more clues. One rainy afternoon, she found herself in the East Wing Gallery, a long, dust-sheeted room. Pulling back a cloth, she uncovered a series of family portraits. The last one was of the Beaumonts, painted just a year before the fire. The previous Duke and Duchess were handsome and smiling, and between them stood 2 children, a vibrant, laughing girl with Alistair's blue eyes, Lady Eleanor, and a young man of 20. It was Alistair, but not as she knew him. His face was unmarred, his smile open and easy, his eyes bright with a youthful confidence that was now entirely gone. Seeing him like that, whole and happy, was more heartbreaking than the scar itself. She found his humanity not in his presence, but in his absence. In the neglected gardens his mother had loved, in the happy portrait of the boy he used to be, and in the hushed, sorrowful tones of his staff. Her perspective began to shift. She stopped seeing him as her jailer and began to see him as a fellow prisoner, trapped in the same house by the ghosts of his past. One evening, emboldened by this new understanding, she decided to breach his walls again. After their silent dinner, as he rose to leave, she spoke. Your Grace. Alistair. He stopped, turning to her with a questioning look. It was the first time she had used his given name. I was in the walled garden today, she said, her voice soft. The roses are being choked by weeds, but some of them are still fighting to bloom. Your mother must have had a remarkable talent. His jaw tightened a muscle, flexing along his unscarred cheek. My mother's pursuits are of no concern. I disagree, Anna countered, rising and walking towards him. They are a part of this house, a part of you. Hiding from the memory of beauty doesn't erase the pain, it only allows the weeds to grow. He stared at her, his blue eyes a turbulent sea of emotions he fought to conceal. You know nothing of my pain. I know what it is to have your life decided for you, she replied, her voice filled with a quiet intensity. To be trapped. I may not know your grief, but I know a cage when I see one. You have locked yourself in here with your work and your memories, and you are letting everything beautiful turn to ruin inside and out. It was a bold, perhaps reckless thing to say. She expected him to erupt in anger, to banish her from his sight. Instead, a profound weariness settled over his features. The formidable Duke seemed to vanish, leaving only a tired, wounded man in his place. What would you have me do? He asked, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. Let me restore the garden, she said simply. Let me bring it back to life. For your mother. For the house. For us. He was silent for a very long time, his gaze fixed on her face, searching for something. pity deceit? He found neither. He found only a genuine earnestness in her storm-grey eyes. "Do as you wish," he said at last, his voice barely a whisper. Then he turned and strode from the room, leaving Anna standing alone in the vast dining hall, a strange sense of victory mingling with the sorrow she felt for him. She had not breached the fortress walls, but she had perhaps opened a window. The restoration of the walled garden became Anna's sanctuary and her purpose. She hired gardeners from the local village, directing them with sketches she drew from her own imagination and from the faint outlines of the original flower beds. Slowly, miraculously, the space began to transform. Weeds gave way to rich soil, overgrown ivy was trimmed back to reveal elegant stonework, and dormant rose bushes were pruned and tended with loving care. Colour and life began to creep back into the forgotten corner of Blackwood Manor. Alistair never mentioned the garden, but Anna knew he watched its progress. Sometimes, from her window, she would see him standing at his own study window in the west wing, a solitary figure looking down at the burgeoning life below. A silent, distant observer of the change she was enacting. Their dinners became less silent. Anna would speak of her progress in the garden or of a book she was reading from the main library. He rarely responded with more than a word or a nod, but he listened. The oppressive silence was replaced by a tentative quiet, a space where words were possible even if they were mostly hers. This fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of a letter bearing a familiar seal. Lord Percival Croft, having discovered her direction, was writing to announce that business was bringing him to the north, and he would be honoured to call upon the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood. Anna's stomach churned. Percival represented a life she had almost chosen, a life of charming ease that now seemed incredibly shallow. His presence here felt like an intrusion, a serpent entering her new, complicated Eden. "We must receive him," Alistair stated when she showed him the letter. His tone was flat, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance, or perhaps jealousy. The thought was so startling, she dismissed it at once. He is a Viscount's son. It would be a social slight to refuse him. Alistair continued all business. Arrange a dinner. Tomorrow evening. Lord Percival Croft arrived, looking every bit the London dandy. He was handsome, impeccably dressed, and oozing a practiced charm that seemed jarringly out of place against the stark backdrop of Blackwood. He greeted Anna with an overly familiar warmth, kissing her hand and holding it just a moment too long. "My dear Anna," he purred, his eyes sweeping over her. "Duchess, the title suits you, but the north. This dreary place is no match for your vibrancy." When Alistair entered the drawing room, Percival's demeanour shifted. He offered the Duke a bow that was just shy of mocking. "Your Grace," Percival said, his gaze flicking unsubtly to Alistair's scar. "An honour to be welcomed into your formidable home. We were all so concerned for Anna married off to a man of such reputation. My wife is more than capable of handling my reputation." Lord Croft Alistair replied, his voice a low growl. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dinner was an exercise in tension. Percival dominated the conversation, regaling them with gossip from London, all the while making subtle digs at Alistair's reclusiveness and the industrial nature of his wealth. He directed most of his attention to Anna, reminiscing about their shared past, reminding her of dances and parties, painting a picture of a life she had lost. Anna played her part as Duchess, coolly deflecting his advances and guiding the conversation to neutral topics. But she was acutely aware of Alistair beside her, silent and coiled as a panther, his knuckles white where he gripped his wine glass. After dinner, Percival cornered Anna in the drawing room, on the pretense of admiring a painting. He is exactly as they say, Percival whispered, his voice a conspiratorial hiss. A brute. Look at the way he glares. You cannot be happy here, Anna. It is not too late. My offer still stands. A man like that cannot know how to treat a woman of your delicacy. He reached out his hand, closing around her arm. Leave him. Come with me. That is quite enough, Croft. Alistair's voice cut through the air like a blade. He had moved with a startling silent speed, and now stood directly behind Percival. Percival dropped his hand from Anna's arm as if burned. He turned a sneer on his handsome face. Protecting your property, Blackwood. I am merely having a conversation with an old friend. Your conversation is over, Alistair said, his blue eyes blazing with a cold fire Anna had never seen. And you will address my wife as Your Grace. You are a guest in my home. Do not forget that again. The raw menace in his voice was unmistakable. Percival, for all his bluster, was a coward at heart. He paled slightly, offered a stiff bow, and made his excuses to retire for the evening. The moment he was gone, the tension in the room remained, but it had changed. It was now a current humming between Anna and Alistair. Thank you, she said softly. He did not look at her. He strode to the fireplace, staring into the flames. He disrespected you. He disrespected this house. I will not tolerate it. It was more than that, she pressed, gently moving to stand near him. You were protecting me. He turned to face her, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his scarred face. You are my wife. It is my duty to protect you. Was it duty, Alistair? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her, his expression a maelstrom of conflict. For a moment, she thought he might finally say something real, something that broke through the walls of his grief and solitude. He took a half-step towards her, his hand lifting as if to touch her cheek. But then the moment shattered. The mask of the Iron Duke slammed back into place. He dropped his hand and stepped back. My solicitor has arranged for Lord Croft's business in the area to be concluded, he said, his voice once again cold and distant. He will be gone by morning. Good night, Your Grace. He turned and left her alone, the sudden warmth in the room vanishing with him. But something had fundamentally shifted. She had seen behind the mask, not of the grieving son this time, but of the possessive, protective husband. He had called her my wife, not as a statement of contract, but as a statement of fact, a claim. And the cold, empty fortress of Blackwood Manor suddenly felt a little less lonely. The incident with Lord Croft acted as an unseen catalyst. A local charity hearing of the new Duchess's residence sent an invitation for the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood to act as patrons for their annual autumn ball. It was the premier social event of the season in the county. Anna expected Alistair to refuse immediately. To her utter astonishment, he agreed. We will attend, he announced one evening, placing the invitation on the dining table. It is time the county remembered that Blackwood has a duchess. His reasoning was logical, a strategic social move, but Anna sensed a deeper motive. He was drawing a line in the sand, presenting a united front to the world after Croft's intrusion. The news sent a ripple of shock and excitement through the staff, and a wave of terror through Anna. She would be on display not just as a newcomer, but as the wife of the monstrous, reclusive Duke. Their judgment would be swift and merciless. The night of the ball arrived cold and clear. Anna stood before the mirror in her chambers as her maid Sarah put the finishing touches on her hair. She had chosen her gown with care, a deep sapphire silk that matched her chambers and brought out the grey in her eyes. It was elegant and understated. Around her neck she wore the only piece of jewellery Alistair had given her, a necklace that had been delivered to her room that afternoon. It was a stunning cascade of diamonds and sapphires, the Blackwood jewels. There was no note, just the box on her vanity. When she descended the grand staircase, Alistair was waiting at the bottom. He was dressed in immaculate black evening wear, the stark white of his cravat emphasizing the sharp lines of his face. As his eyes met hers, he froze. He looked at her, not as a business partner or a housemate, but as a man looks at a woman. His gaze traveled from her elegantly styled hair down to the necklace glittering at her throat and back to her eyes. The air crackled with a silent, potent admiration. "You look exquisite, Anna," he said, his voice lower than usual. He offered her his arm, his touch firm and warm through her glove. It was the most contact they had ever had. Their arrival at the assembly rooms caused an immediate sensation. A hush fell over the chattering crowd as the Duke of Blackwood, the Phantom of the North, entered the room for the first time in over a decade. All eyes were on him, on his scarred face, and then on the beautiful poised young woman on his arm. Whispers followed them, like the rustle of dry leaves. Alistair was a formidable presence. He did not smile, but he was impeccably polite, his deep voice commanding respect as he greeted the local dignitaries. He kept Anna close to his side, his hand resting possessively in the small of her back. She felt like a ship moored to a great, unshakable rock in a sea of prying eyes. And then the orchestra began the first waltz. "My dear Alistair," said, turning to her, "as my Duchess, I believe you are obliged to grant me the first dance." There was a hint of something new in his eyes, a playful challenge. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "I believe I am, Your Grace." He led her onto the floor. The crowd parted before them, giving them the center of the room. As he took her in his arms, a collective gasp went through the assembly. He held her firmly, respectfully, his large hand spanning hers. He was a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding her through the steps with a silent, confident strength. They moved as one, the world melting away, until it was only the two of them circling under the glittering chandeliers. They did not speak. They didn't need to. In the dance, in the way he held her, in the way his piercing blue eyes never left hers, a new conversation was taking place. It spoke of admiration, of possession of a reluctant magnetic pull that defied their cold contract. Anna felt her heart beating a frantic rhythm that had nothing to do with the music. When the waltz ended, he led her from the floor, the applause of the room, a distant thunder. He guided her onto a secluded balcony overlooking the gardens, the cool night air, a welcome relief. "They are staring," Anna murmured, fanning her flushed cheeks. "Let them stare," Alistair said, his voice soft. He stood beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. "Tonight you have shown them you are not a prisoner. You are the Duchess of Blackwood. You are my wife." The way he said "my wife" sent a shiver down her spine. The words were no longer a title but a declaration. "Alistair," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "The fire, Mrs. Gable told me, about your family." The warmth in his eyes instantly chilled. The wall went back up. "It is not a subject for a party." "Perhaps not," she agreed, not backing down. "But it is the subject of you. It is the scar you carry, not just on your face, but in your soul. I see it. I am not afraid of it." He turned to face her fully, his expression tortured. "You should be," he whispered, his voice raw. "That fire. It was my fault. I was arguing with my father about the future of the estate. He wanted tradition. I wanted progress, the mills, the mines. We were shouting. A lamp was knocked over. I was so full of anger and pride. I hesitated for a moment. A moment. And in that moment, everything was lost. My sister. I hear her calling for me in my nightmares. The confession hung between them, a devastating weight of guilt he had carried alone for a decade. Tears welled in Anna's eyes, for the boy he was, for the man he had become. Without thinking, driven by an impulse she didn't understand, she reached up and gently touched his scarred cheek. Her fingers were light, reverent. He flinched at her touch but didn't pull away. He closed his eyes, leaning into her hand as if it were a lifeline. It was an act of profound surrender. "It was not your fault, Alistair," she whispered, her heart aching for him. "It was a tragedy. You cannot carry the blame for it forever." He opened his eyes, and they were filled with a decade of unshed tears and a desperate, burgeoning hope. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a duchess, not a contract, but a woman who saw past his scars to the broken man beneath. His other hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his face. "Anna," he breathed, and her name was a prayer. The world outside the balcony, with its music and its whispers, ceased to exist. There was only the cold night air, the warmth of their hands, and the silent, earth-shattering admission that their marriage of convenience had just become something terrifyingly, wonderfully real. The aftermath of the ball was a quiet revolution. The invisible wall between the east and west wings of the manor dissolved. Alistair began to seek Anna out, not just for dinner, but for conversation. He would appear in the restored garden as she sketched, watching her work in comfortable silence. He invited her into his sacred study, not to discuss household matters, but to show her the schematics for a new water-powered loom, his eyes alight with a passion she had only ever seen in artists. He explained the intricate mechanics, treating her not as a decorative wife, but as an intellectual equal. Anna, in turn, blossomed under his attention. She shared her own passions, showing him her portfolio of sketches, explaining the principles of light and composition. He was a surprisingly insightful critic, seeing the engineering and structure even in her art. They were two different minds, one forged in iron, and numbers the other in charcoal and light, but they found a common language in their shared intelligence and their growing, unspoken affection. One night, as a storm raged outside, they sat before the fire in his study. He spoke more of his past, of his dreams, for the North, of creating a business that was not just profitable, but that provided a stable livelihood for thousands. He spoke of his guilt, and for the first time, Anna saw the burden lessen as he shared it. He was beginning to heal, and she was the cause. Their fragile new world, however, was built on a foundation of another man's ruin, her father's. And Sir Reginald Vance was not a man to accept his fate quietly. A letter arrived for Anna from her sister Clara. It was filled with frantic, worried prose. Their father had fallen back in with a bad crowd, specifically with Lord Percival Croft, who had been a frequent visitor to Vance Manor since his return from the north, filling Sir Reginald's head with poison. "Father is obsessed," Anna Clara wrote. "Lord Croft has convinced him that the Duke cheated him, that the marriage contract was fraudulent. He says Croft has a plan to ruin the Duke and liberate you, and that when he does our family's honour and fortune will be restored. They speak in whispers about the new mill at Blackwood, about the river and the dam. I am frightened." A cold dread washed over Anna. The dam. Alistair had just shown her the plans. It was the linchpin of his new enterprise, a massive feat of engineering designed to regulate the flow of the River Lena, ensuring a constant source of power for the new textile mill downstream. Sabotaging it would not just be a financial disaster. A sudden, uncontrolled release of that much water would be catastrophic, flooding the valley and endangering the village of Blackwood Bridge that lay just below. Her father, goaded by a spurned and vengeful lord, was planning to destroy the very man who had saved him. Worse, He was planning to destroy the man Anna was beginning to love. The word bloomed in her heart, terrifying and undeniable. She was torn. To betray her own father, the man who had raised her however flawed he was, or to stand by and watch him destroy Alistair and endanger countless innocent lives. The choice was agonizing, but it was also clear. Her loyalty was no longer to the man who had sold her, but to the man who was slowly, tentatively showing her his heart. She found Alistair in his workshop, a cavernous stone building behind the manor, filled with the smell of hot metal and the gleam of half-finished machinery. He was bent over a metal lathe, his brow furrowed in concentration, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up to reveal strong, capable forearms. "Alistair," she said, her voice shaking. She held out Clara's letter. "You need to read this." He took the letter, his expression darkening as he scanned the words. When he looked up, his face was a granite mask of cold fury. The Iron Duke was back, but this time his anger was not directed at her. "Croft," he snarled, "I should have destroyed him when I had the chance." "My father," Anna whispered, shame and sorrow choking her. "I am so sorry." He came to her then, his expression softening as he looked at her distressed face. He took her by the shoulders, his grip firm and steadying. "This is not your fault, Anna. This is the work of two greedy, foolish men, your father's weakness and Croft's malice. You did the right thing by bringing this to me." His trust in her, even as her own family plotted against him, was a profound gift. "What will they do?" she asked. "The dam has a weak point, a series of sluice gates that are still under construction. If they were to be opened or destroyed during a storm like tonight's with the river already swollen, the resulting flood would wipe out the mill site and the village. They would see it as an act of God, a structural failure." He looked towards the window where rain lashed against the panes. "And they will use the cover of this storm to do it." "What will you do?" she asked, her heart pounding. "I will not let them threaten my work or my people," he said, his voice hard as steel. He turned to a speaking tube on the wall, a modern contraption of his own design that connected to the main house and the stables. He barked a series of orders for his estate security, a dozen hand-picked men to ride for the dam immediately. "I'm going with you," Anna stated, her resolve hardening. "No, it's too dangerous. My father is there." She counted, her chin high. "This is my family's shame. I will not hide from it. I will face it with you." He looked at her, at the fire in her storm-grey eyes, and saw not a fragile lady, but a duchess of iron, will a true partner. He gave a sharp, decisive nod. "Very well," he said, grabbing a heavy oilskin coat from a peg and wrapping it around her shoulders. "Stay close to me." Together they plunged out into the raging storm, riding hard for the dam on the River Lena, towards a confrontation that would decide the fate of Blackwood and their own. The ride to the dam was a brutal battle against the elements. Wind howled across the moors and rain fell in blinding sheets, turning the ground to treacherous mud. Alistair rode ahead, a dark, indomitable figure, shielding Anna as much as he could from the storm's fury. They arrived at the construction site to a scene of chaos. Lanterns swung wildly in the wind, casting long, dancing shadows over the half-finished structure of the dam, a towering wall of stone and timber that held back the churning, swollen river. Alistair's men had already engaged a group of ruffians near the sluice gate controls. The clash of steel and shouted curses were nearly lost in the roar of the storm and the river. Alistair dismounted, drawing a pistol from his saddlebag. "Stay here behind the rocks," he commanded Anna, his voice a bellow over the wind. But Anna's eyes were scanning the chaos, searching for two faces. She saw them then by the main winch mechanism, desperately trying to break the lock, her father, his face a mask of frantic desperation, and Lord Percival Croft urging him on with vicious glee. "They're at the main winch," she screamed to Alistair, pointing. Alistair saw them. He moved with the fluid, deadly grace she had seen in the drawing room, but this was no social threat display. This was raw and real. He disabled one of Croft's henchmen with a swift, brutal efficiency that spoke of a man who knew how to fight. As he closed in, Sir Reginald Vance looked up and saw his daughter, her face pale in the lantern light, standing beside the very man he was trying to ruin. His nerve broke. He dropped the crowbar he was holding and staggered back, his face a mess of shame and terror. Croft, however, was made of more venomous stuff. Seeing his plan failing, he turned his fury on the cause of his humiliation. He drew a small, elegant dueling pistol from his coat, but he didn't aim it at Alistair. He aimed it at Anna. "If I cannot have you, no one will, you treacherous bitch!" He shrieked, his handsome face twisted into an ugly snarl. Time seemed to slow. Anna saw the flash of the pan, the dark maw of the barrel. She heard Alistair shout her name, a sound of pure anguish. She braced for the impact, but it was her father who moved. In a single redeeming act of paternal love, Sir Reginald lunged forward, shoving Anna to the muddy ground and taking the bullet meant for her high in his shoulder. He collapsed with a cry of pain. Alistair was on Croft in an instant. The fight was short and savage. There was no ducal decorum, only the raw strength of a man protecting his own. He disarmed Croft and landed a powerful blow that sent the Viscount's son sprawling into the mud unconscious. The fight was over. Alistair's men had subdued the remaining saboteurs. He rushed to Anna's side, his face etched with a fear more naked than any emotion she had ever seen from him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands checking her for injuries, his voice rough with concern. "No," she whispered, her gaze on her father, who was groaning on the ground, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Alistair's men pulled Sir Reginald up. The baronet looked at his daughter, tears mixing with the rain on his face. "Anna, I am sorry," he said. "Forgive me." Anna looked from her weeping, broken father to Alistair, whose face was now hard and unforgiving. He had every right to hand her father over to the magistrates, to let him be transported or hanged for his crime. "Alistair, please," she begged, her voice thick with tears. "He is my father. For all his faults, he just saved my life." Alistair looked at the pathetic man, then back to his wife, her beautiful face streaked with mud and rain, her eyes pleading. He saw not the daughter of his enemy, but the woman who had brought light back into his shadowed life, who had touched his scars without flinching, who had stood by his side against a storm. His love for her, fierce and absolute, outweighed his desire for justice. He gave a sharp nod to his head of security. "Take Lord Croft to the magistrates. He is to be charged with attempted murder and sabotage. See that he hangs." He then gestured to Sir Reginald. "Take Sir Reginald back to the manor. Have the doctor attend to him. He will be confined there until I decide his fate." It was an act of incredible mercy, done not for the man who had wronged him, but for the woman he loved. Later, after the storm had passed, and the dawn broke, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and grey, they stood in the quiet of his study. Sir Reginald was recovering in a guest room under guard. Croft was on his way to prison. Anna turned to Alistair, her heart too full for words. "Thank you," she whispered. "I did it for you," he said, his voice soft. He stepped closer, finally closing the last bit of distance between them. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "When Croft aimed that pistol at you, In that moment, I realized that my mills, my fortune, my name, they are all meaningless without you. The fire 10 years ago took my life. You, Anna, have given it back to me. And you, Alistair, she said, her own tears beginning to fall, have shown me what it is to be truly loved. I love you. Not the Duke of Blackwood, but you. The man who builds, who protects, who has carried so much pain and still finds the strength to be kind. He leaned down and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion and fire, but one of profound tenderness and relief. It was a kiss that sealed not a contract, but a covenant. A promise of a shared future, built not on debt and obligation, but on a love that had been forged in shadow, tested by betrayal, and finally irrevocably proven in the heart of a storm. The young lady who was sold to a stranger had found her home, not in a grand manner, but in the heart of the powerful scarred duke who had turned out to be her truest love. And so the tale of Anna Vance and Alistair Beaumont comes to a close. Theirs was a journey that began not with a loving promise, but with a cold, desperate transaction. It shows us that sometimes the most profound love stories don't start in ballrooms, but are forged in the quiet corridors of misunderstood hearts. They discovered that true strength isn't about impenetrable walls, but about having the courage to let someone in, to show them your scars, and to trust them with your healing. From a union of convenience, they built an empire of devotion, proving that the most unexpected bargains can sometimes yield the most priceless treasures. If their story of defiance and devotion moved you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed it. Share this video with a friend who loves a story of love against all odds, and most importantly, subscribe and ring the notification bell. We have so many more tales of history drama and unconquerable love to share with you, and we wouldn't want you to miss a single one. Thank you for listening.